Tapping in. Are we live?
Hey, Mr. Miles Xavier. One of the things that this show gives us a lot of joy in doing is being able to be suggested different topics, expose ourselves to different forms of information, and then synthesize that information and bring our conversation out of it, right? And this week, it's always great when we get suggestions that are outside of, let's say, what would be our usual pull to. I think left to our own objective, we discuss hip hop and racism all day, all day, every day, which is a beautiful thing, man. It's a beautiful thing. But that being said, this week we were brought into some pretty interesting information about what's happening in the UK at the moment. And there's a lot of relevance for a conversation like this regarding migration, especially given the times. And if anybody is um, not particularly aware of the migrant status internationally, we're almost at a place now which migrant laws and laws against different migrations are changing. They're changing like pretty quickly, and I think this is another example of it. So um, that's the relevance element to this conversation, right? What did you think going into what we heard about the British law being changed?
I was scared.
Can you introduce it though? Can you introduce it as well too?
Yeah. So the bottom line is that 6 million people in England are potentially eligible for being stripped of their citizenship. The vast majority of those people are non-white people, right? 41% actually of non-white people are 2 in every 5 are eligible for the deprivation of their citizenship. It's 5% of white. This affects 5% of the white British population. So there's that, right? Being deprived of the citizenship in the country where you are a citizen. I've never, as somebody who I'm second generation, right? So my parents, my dad, on my dad's side grew up as immigrants from St. Kitts, right? But I've always firmly known that being born here in the United States, I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm hell bent on making Chicago everything that it can be. So I've never really thought about like leaving and changing my citizenship. But this made me think of like, what if the country I am from took away my citizenship?
Yeah, and that's what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. So essentially, this bill allows for British Homeland Security to be able to go into migrant status, question migrant status, set up these rather steep laws of migrant citizenship regulation. Priti Patel, who is the Home Secretary in the UK, rolling out this new bill. Essentially, if for instance, in your case, right, a second citizen migrant, your citizenship can be questioned and then also revoked from you. And you see that it's especially affecting people who are working these public jobs too, who get their pay cut away from them because they can't prove citizenship. And some of the things that they're asking them to prove are ridiculous, like a proof of ID for every single year you've been in the UK. That's the equivalent of saying dude, find me a slip of yours from 4 years ago.
Dude, yeah, my driver's license is expired. I'd be in so much trouble. You dig me?
But it's real. It's real. That's what's happening.
But it's crazy because it's like, I just like for real, on a human level, like when you read this as somebody who has lived in multiple different countries, right? Who has always you've always been able to go home to South Africa, right? Like, how does this make you feel, bro? Like when you read, like, cause you're there now, of all places to be, you're in the UK now, right?
What?
So like, But like, you know what I mean? So like, just
I
talk to
do.
me about how this, when you just like this concept, right? Like what is this? How does this make you feel?
Um, how Miles, it speaks towards a bigger issue that we're seeing, right? I don't have to look. Let me talk about home for me, right? South Africa at the moment. Currently, South Africa has over 7 million immigrants, 6 million immigrants going into 7 million immigrants, right? And the current economic status of the country is one that is imploding on itself and is just it's unfeasible to be able to carry the weight of those migrants. Nonetheless, it is given its proximity to a lot of these other countries, it's almost its obligation and duty to be able to take in people from these other countries, especially because at the time when South Africa was going through its oppressive situation, people fled South Africa and were welcomed into other countries. Granted, not in the same mass, but still that still happened, right? So I bring that up to say I think the line is a little bit difficult when it comes to if you're going to just look at things from a black and white perspective and say economically doesn't make sense, yes or no. It will be easy to justify in a lot of places. Yes, it's right to be able to make more stringent migration laws. Yes,
But wait,
it's
wait,
right
wait.
to be able.
Like, but this isn't migration though. This is like you're a citizen. Like you're saying you could justify removing people who are citizens because they could potentially live somewhere else.
Now, this particular bill that's being spoken about, right, is a bill that is targeted for the migrants that are coming into the UK, and under it, it expands itself into this broader category of regulating migrant citizenship by regular checkups and things of that nature, right? So the whole exercise is to stop people from coming in the first place.
But it also places at risk 6 million people who currently live there.
Indeed. That's also a function of it. But all to say, right? All to say, just going into that point, which is that if you're gonna just look at things from a black and white economic perspective, that type of thing, it's easy to justify why this would be something that a government should enact. But if you're gonna look at it from a humanitarian perspective, and you're gonna look at it from a empathy level, you can appreciate that nobody flees their country with the shirt on their back to take a life-threatening trip across the world to another place by their choosing. Nobody does that by just unless placed under significant circumstances to be able to do it, right? So there's that appreciation too that to take into perspective. And how do I feel about it, man? I think there's not enough empathy and there's too much rationality um in these types of things that we're seeing right now.
I don't think it's about a lack of empathy, man. I think it's an intentional, like when you say it could be economically justified. Like I like, so immigration is its own is a whole issue where, all right, you're trying to enter into a country, right? That is the reasons why people do that often require an empathetic approach, right? And we can have that conversation. But when we're talking about you've allowed these people to come to this country legally, period. Like they've come settled here, you've given them citizenship, right? I'm
Yeah.
operating. I'm operating as a citizen. I'm second generation. My parents came here, became citizens, but because I could the country that they're from will allow me to be a citizen there too, I'm now at risk. So I was born in this country,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
now my citizenship can be removed. I don't think there's any economic justification for that.
No, you're right. You're right. And especially when you look at the history of the UK with these types of decisions, right? Speaking specifically about Windrush, right? Where you had in the 50s and 60s, they opened their borders welcomely to these Commonwealth countries, Barbados, Jamaica, inviting these people over to their country, promising them citizenship status so that they could help rebuild the UK after World War II. And then 50 years later, 60 years later, those same people are not being subjected towards these laws that you speak about. It's insidious. it's very blatant and it's exclusive, and it's intent to be exclusatory. I don't think that's the word at all. But in order to keep people out, you know what I mean? It's very on the nose with what the intention behind it is. I fully agree with that.
Yeah, to keep people out in the sense that it's sending the message that if you even are to move here and through the strenuous process of immigration, you are able to become a citizen. You have a lower class of citizenship. You and like I was reading this article in the Guardian, bro, and they were saying like they're basically telling you like you can come here and move here, but we reserve the right to deport you at any time. That's that and I appreciate you bringing up Windrush because that whole debacle adds to the context of this, right? There's also the context of the same woman, right? Priti Patel, she introduced a policing bill, which is, no, she didn't introduce the bill. She crafted into the bill a very specific section about protesting, banning protesters from several actions that are fundamental to exercising protest, right? We talk often about on this podcast about protest and organizing as a form of expressing, our social opinions, our agenda, what we want to happen. It's a huge part of organizing, right? So this bill bans protesters from locking, right? Which is essentially locking arms, attaching themselves to anything, any business. Specifically, they can't attach themselves to another person, object, or to land. That's a fundamental part of protesting. Think about sit-ins. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was saying, just think about sit-ins. Think about when we think about protests, that's a big part of it. That's a big part of how we can take up space as a collective that wants to express our discontent. Right. It also becomes under this bill a criminal offense to obstruct in any way major transport works from being carried out. This don't scare you, bro?
It definitely does. It definitely does. Especially, and you're somebody that organizes protests, right? So I fully understand that you get the integral parts of like what it takes for one to have a successful to make a successful social statement like that, right? So under that wording that she has put into that bill, what does that say to you about the intention of how British police are going to be treating people who want to protest in this type of way?
It speaks for itself, bro. The police would be entitled to stop and search people or vehicles if they suspect they might be carrying any article that could be used in the newly prohibited protests, right? So anything that might be used in a protest where people would be locking, or anything where in a protest.
My body parts? My body parts?
Hey, man. Hey, right? There also would grant the police the right to stop and search people without suspicion if they believe that a protest will occur in that area, right? I think this type of language speaks for itself. And in the context of, okay, so this is the type of cracking down you're doing on our ability to express ourselves. And now you're saying that we reserve the right to deport anybody who, in the context of this, is very important. What they said is that anybody who is eligible, right, is those, they can be made stateless so long as the government believes they are eligible for foreign citizenship and that their actions or that they have conducted themselves in a manner which is seriously prejudicial to the vital interests of the United Kingdom.
Let me hold you on that point. Let me hold you on that point right before you read it again, because it does speak to a question that we're getting in the comments, right? Which, what are the requirements for removal of citizenship if you have citizenship under these bills?
Foreign-born British citizens can be made stateless so long as the government believes they are eligible for foreign citizenship and that their actions and that they have conducted themselves in a manner which is seriously prejudicial to the vital interests of the United Kingdom, right? So as long as you could live somewhere else based on either where you were born or where your parents were born or your immigration status, if any of those things grant you citizenship somewhere else, and that you have conducted yourself in a manner which is seriously prejudicial to the vital interests of the United Kingdom. I don't know. I do a lot of good stuff for black folks. I'm sure there is a white person somewhere in the United States that would say, I have conducted myself in a manner which is prejudicial to the vital interests of their idea of the United States. Right? You know what I'm saying? Like, that is such vague language that, bro, like, I know that if that was over here, I would be in danger. For facts.
And that's true. That's very true. And I think you're right in that by leaving the wording so vague, it's intentional to be able to have it be loose in who it refers to, right? And I think, like, if you do look outside of just not even just the UK, look at Spain, look at France, look at Italy, see what's happening with the immigration laws. The US prior to Joe Biden stepping in, even then, even then, the situation when we saw the Haitian migrants coming into the US and how that was handled, that was a whole thing too. So it does seem like this wave of this wave of, let's say, right wing rhetoric, extreme right wing rhetoric when it comes to migration, inclusivity, and how to just essentially just social community, right, is not the norm, and we're actually seeing a wave of it going into where people are dealing with this like how they deal with it in Italy, where migrants talk about getting beat, migrants talk about getting arrested, beat to death. There's a very dope podcast, I forget the name, with Francis Ngannou, where it describes his whole process. UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou describes his process of leaving his country and coming into France, right? And like what that took out of him to make it happen, man. So yeah, it's terrifying. It's terrifying to see that that's the way that the world is moving towards, and it definitely makes it makes one have to think a little bit harder about where they want to consider home, the places that they want to visit, the spaces that they want to go to, because as a black man, that's something that unfortunately I have to carry on and think about. Like, what are the laws of a particular country when it comes to foreign nationals? And being in this country over here right now, news like that definitely is disconcerting for sure.
Do you remember earlier this year when on this podcast we talked about how the UK declared itself racism free? You remember that? Because that's a real thing that happened. I don't have the episode number on hand.
It was on the news. It was on the news. They made a statement. They said UK declares itself racism free. Turned around, rolled that paper up, and started beating migrants out of the UK with it.
Fam, this is we gotta call a spade, bro. This is trash. This is exactly what we're trying to fight against. This does not speak to any type of sense of common humanity, empathy, equality, diversity, and inclusion. All them words that your corporations are telling you that are now a part of your project portfolio. This is scary. This is families. This is people that have loved ones that are worried about whether they're going to be able to see them. People that don't know anything but the place that they live and have lived, and that are now at risk, right? And to bring back the context of the protests, it's like, bro, you're now stifling people's ability to express dissent with what the government's doing in front of our face. What are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this for the generations that are coming after us? Let's just have a think about what this is leading to. Let's just really have a think about how fast we're losing, how sure we are of the rights that we think we have, and how fast we're losing them. Let's all just take this as a moment to just think very seriously about that.
And if you want to see what that looks like in real time, think back about the Hong Kong protests. Remember how big and important those were? What happened to those protests? There was in Russia, they had the march against Putin earlier this year, 200,000 people got arrested in the same period. 200,000 people got arrested. What happened to that protest? So like the act of being able to strip away those rights has some very, very serious effects in it, especially when you have when you will have youth or population or whoever saying that we don't agree with what this government is doing, and you are legally not allowed to be able to do that. That just opens up space for impunity, and that's exactly what this looks like at the very least.
And it's people behind all this. It's people behind, like it's people that are doing this. We need to recognize that, right? Like we need to recognize, like, how do we confront the people that feel like this is what they want the country to be: exclusionary, unsafe for people that aren't white. How do we confront those people, and how do we try and heal when we understand that these laws, these bills, these political games all affect real people on the ground? Like, we got to lock up. That's what we got to do, and get locked up for it, I guess. Because I'm locking arms with all my homies. That's what I'm doing. Yep. That's what I'm locking in with everybody. Yep.
We'll continue to lock in. We'll continue locking.